Since today's the day that China man takes office, yeah, see what I did there? And because I'm super petty, let's take today to talk about why we have a Chinese man to thank for the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. So real quick back history, but in 1857, the Supreme Court decided that slaves and descendants of slaves cannot be citizens. When this man, Dred Scott, who was a slave at the time, was taken by his owners from Missouri to Illinois, where slavery was illegal. And when he returned back to Missouri, because he had stepped foot on the land of the free, he claimed that he was a free man. And in one of the worst Supreme Court decisions in the history of America, Supreme Court stated, nope, slaves and descendants of slaves cannot be citizens. And in 1868, the 14th Amendment was enacted, where the first part talked about birthright citizenship. And when it comes to birthright citizenship, there are two approaches. The first is called jus soli, which means rule of the land, which basically means that if you're born on the land of that country, you are automatically a citizen of that country. And the second approach is called jus sanguinis, which essentially means that you are a citizen of the country that your parents are a citizen of. And as you can see from this map, the United States adopted the jus soli rule, which means that if you were born in America, you are an American citizen. But as we saw, there were obvious exceptions that were upheld when the 14th Amendment was passed. And then in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, where the Chinese immigrants who were helping to build the American Railroad at the time were doing such a good job that the European Americans were all of a sudden like, they're taking our jobs. And thus the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, where for the first time in American history, a whole group of ethnic people were singled out and banned from entering America. And then in 1884, the Supreme Court ruled that Native Americans who were originally on this land who were born in reservations cannot be American citizens. Through a case called Elk versus Wilkins, where a Winnebago native named John Elk decided to renounce his tribal allegiance and claim his birthright citizenship that was guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. And when John Elk decided to exercise his right as a citizen and go vote, a man named Charles Wilkins, who was a registrar in that war, denied him his right. And that's when it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they decided that anyone who was born on a reservation has prior allegiance to their tribe and therefore cannot be a citizen of the United States. And then in that same year, a Chinese American who was born in America, Muktin Sin, who was born in California, was sent to China at the age of 9 years old by his father. And when he returned back to America at the age of 14 years old, they stopped him at the border stating that he was not an American citizen. And the local court judge didn't know what to do, so he just kind of put out an open invitation to all of the lawyers locally and asked them what he should do. And they were basically like, I mean, if he was born here, the case was never reviewed by Supreme Court, no one challenged it, and it just kind of disappeared, and he was allowed to return back to the United States. Now fast forward to 1894, when this man, Wong King Ark, who was a child of Chinese immigrants but was born in San Francisco, California, and had previously gone to and from China when he was younger, before the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And then on this third trip, he had gone to China and he had found a wife, but because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, he couldn't bring his wife over to the United States. And his wife got pregnant in China and he went there to go visit his child. When he returned a year later back to the United States, with his proper documentation, including his birth certificate that stated that he was born in California, but at the port, they denied his entry and stated that he was not a US citizen. And it took 2 years for that case to reach the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decided, and I quote, whether a child born in the United States of parents of Chinese descent who at the time of his birth are subjects of the Emperor of China but have a permanent domicile and residence in the United States and are there carrying on business and are not employed in any diplomatic or official capacity under the Emperor of China becomes at the time of his birth a citizen of the United States. And the Supreme Court even went on further to explain the acts of Congress known as the Chinese Exclusion Acts prohibiting persons of the Chinese race and especially Chinese laborers from coming into the United States do not and cannot apply to him because they're stating that he is an American citizen, and that trumps the fact whether or not whatever race or ethnicity he is. And after setting a historical case, the first thing that Wong King Ark did was exercise his right as a citizen and petition the United States courts to allow his wife and family to come to America to live with him. And it was that decision in 1899 that deemed that all children, regardless of ethnicity, if they were born on US soil, was automatically a US citizen. Well, actually, almost everyone. Because it took the American government another 26 years to realize that withholding the rights from a whole group of people just because the government feels insecure for stealing their land isn't right. In 1925, they included Native Americans in the birthright citizenship. And that is a story of how not only a Chinese American helped to establish the birthright citizenship, but how a community of minorities, unknowingly and indirectly, helped make America a better place.